My name is Emily Foster. I'm 36 years old, a small-town librarian in Portland, Maine. I wear my chestnut hair tied high most days, more out of habit than style, and I've always found comfort in quiet places, the hush of old book aisles, the soft crackle of turning pages. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you my life was gently predictable. Some might have even called it enviable. A cozy cottage on the edge of town with a neat little garden full of blue hydrangeas. A husband who came home at 6:30 sharp, loosened his patterned bow tie by the kitchen counter, and kissed my forehead as if that was the most natural ritual in the world. Daniel was 42. He worked as a financial consultant, spent his days on conference calls that sounded terribly important, and in the evenings, he'd bring home pastries from that French bakery on Munjoy Hill. Our routine was so steady it felt like breathing. We didn't have children. Sometimes we talked about it, then let the conversation drift away like steam off my morning coffee. I told myself it was enough. That our shared Sunday mornings at Jenny's Porch Cafe, our dog-eared mystery novels left on the ottoman, our quiet dinners of rosemary chicken and glasses of cheap Pinot were the very picture of contentment. I thought I was happy. Truly, I did. Because isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? A soft place to land, someone to share the weather report with, to fold laundry beside, to sigh with relief when they slip into bed next to you. I believed in that with a kind of stubborn, hopeful ignorance that only makes sense until it doesn't. And now, well. Now the hydrangeas are starting to brown at the edges, and the only sound in the kitchen is the low hum of the refrigerator. It's funny, isn't it, how a house can feel so alive when you're waiting for someone to walk through the door, and so suffocatingly still when you know they never will again? It's been 3 weeks since Daniel died. A heart attack, they told me, like it was a tidy explanation. I sat in Dr. Patel's chilly office, nodding as she used words like atherosclerosis and massive coronary event, clutching my cardigan tighter around my shoulders as if that could keep out the truth. The funeral was a blur of black suits and cloying perfume, of hands gripping mine a beat too long, of murmured platitudes that evaporated before they even settled. I keep replaying that final evening in my head. The way Daniel stood by the stove, rolling up his shirt sleeves, laughing when I nearly spilled the sauce. How he set a tiny sapphire necklace into my palm with that secret smile of his and said, "Just because. You're the only one for me, Em." Those words echo now in the hollow spaces of our home, like a cruel joke only I seem to hear. Sometimes I sit at our kitchen table long after the sun goes down, a cappuccino growing cold between my palms. I find myself staring at the front door, half expecting the knob to turn, for Daniel to stroll in with that easy confidence, shoes clicking on the hardwood, shoulders dusted with evening fog. It's absurd, of course. The door stays closed. The coffee gets cold. I'm alone. But maybe what haunts me most is not the emptiness he left behind, but how complete I believed we were. 15 years. 15 years of matching mugs, synchronized calendars, shared inside jokes. 15 years of thinking I was the love of his life. Tell me something. Do you think, like I used to, that love is the same thing as knowing someone? That just because they whisper your name at night and bring you hydrangeas on your birthday, it means they've let you in all the way? I did. I thought marriage meant no hidden rooms, no locked drawers. I thought trust was a given, not a gamble. Turns out, I was wrong. Blissfully, painfully wrong. And it's that realization, that unsettling sense of how little I actually understood the man I shared my bed with, that keeps me awake more than grief ever could. I suppose that's why I'm telling you this. Because sometimes, speaking it out loud makes it real in a way silence can't. Because maybe someone out there is living inside the same fragile dream I was, and needs to hear how quickly it can crack. So if you've ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to keep a piece of yourself safe, or if you've ever wondered what might be lurking in the corners of someone else's heart, leave me a comment. Share your story. And if you want to follow along as I unravel mine, this mess of marriage, betrayal, and a truth I never could have imagined, then hit that subscribe button. Because this is only the beginning. The night after Daniel's funeral, I found something that changed everything. Something that made my knees buckle right there on our oak floor. And once you see what I saw, you'll never look at trust the same way again. Ready? Let me take you there. I grew up in a little town called Newbury, about an hour outside Burlington, Vermont. It's the kind of place with weather-beaten porches, kids on rusted bikes racing down cracked sidewalks, and neighbors who still wave when they drive by. My mom worked at the diner off Main Street, tying her strawberry blonde hair into a neat bun every morning before slipping into her faded green uniform. She smelled like coffee and lemon soap. My stepdad ran a hardware store that mostly sold fishing gear and spare lawn mower parts. Our house was small, one story with a squeaky screen door that never quite closed right. In the summers, I'd lie on the back deck and watch the clouds drift over the tops of the maples, wondering what kind of life waited for me beyond county lines. I used to think love was something that would sweep in like those summer thunderstorms. Loud. Unavoidable. Soaking you through before you had time to run for cover. It sounds silly now, but when I was 9, I wrote my future name in pencil on the inside cover of my library books. Emily Carter, Emily Reynolds, Emily Wilson, depending on whatever boy smiled at me in class that week. I wanted it so badly, that feeling of belonging to someone else. I thought it would be like trading in my scraped knees and second-hand shoes for something shinier. Something sure. My mother didn't have much to say about love. She believed in work, in paying bills on time, in making a pot roast stretch for 3 nights if she seasoned it right. Once, when I asked her if she ever felt butterflies around my stepdad, she just snorted. Said butterflies were for teenagers and fools. Love, real love, was showing up. Fixing the leaking faucet without complaining. Picking up ant traps at the grocery store because you noticed the little lines of them marching under the sink. I tried to believe her, I really did. But part of me always hoped there was more. Isn't that what fairy tales do to us? Sneak into our heads so early, plant those pretty ideas that love should be grand gestures, stolen kisses under the stars, warm hands brushing tears away. I carried that with me all the way through high school, letting it color the way I read every smile, every compliment. I went to prom in a borrowed lavender dress, hoping the boy with shaggy blonde hair who drove a beat-up Jeep would lean in close and whisper he couldn't imagine life without me. He didn't. He smelled like cigarettes and Dr. Pepper, and by Monday he was holding someone else's hand in the cafeteria. Still, it didn't dim the hope. If anything, it made it burn brighter. I was convinced my story just hadn't started yet. That all the quiet Friday nights in my bedroom, stacking paperbacks in tidy rows, would one day be worth it when the right person came along. You ever feel that way? Like all the ordinary moments are just placeholders, waiting for the chapter that finally makes sense of them? I went off to college in Portland, studied literature because I couldn't think of anything else I wanted to spend 4 years buried in. My dorm room was cramped and smelled like burnt popcorn half the time, but it felt like a new beginning. I decorated it with postcards from places I'd never been, Rome, Tokyo, Vancouver, telling myself one day I'd send my own cards back home, scribbling little love notes along the bottom. During those years, I watched couples on campus hold hands as they walked between classes. I'd sit at the cafe on State Street, stirring honey into my tea, eavesdropping on soft giggles, on whispered plans for road trips and tiny apartments downtown. I imagined that would be me soon enough. That my person was just running a bit late. Looking back, maybe I was always too ready to hand over my heart. I thought trust was the default, not something you built carefully. I thought the right kind of love would make everything simple. Clean. Safe. But that's the trouble with fairy tales, isn't it? They skip over the grocery bills, the nights you lie awake counting ceiling tiles because you're too worried to sleep, the way resentment can slip in like a draft through a cracked window if you're not paying attention. When I met Daniel, I was 21. He walked into that cafe where I'd practically set up camp, wearing a slate gray sweater and that careful, polite smile that made it seem like he always knew a little more than he let on. He complimented the novel I had on my table, asked if I minded him joining me. We ended up talking until my tea went cold. When he laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners. It felt safe. It felt easy. And I remember thinking, maybe my mom was right all along. Maybe love didn't need fireworks. Maybe it just needed a quiet booth, a shared scone, and the sense that someone would rather be nowhere else. Funny how memory works. Even now, I can still see the way the afternoon light came through the cafe windows that day, catching the dust in lazy spirals. I can still hear the clink of cups being stacked behind the counter, the little hum Daniel made under his breath as he stirred cream into his coffee. It seemed important then. Like a snapshot of the beginning of everything. Of course, back then I didn't know the difference between comfort and depth. Between familiarity and real intimacy. I mistook reliability for devotion. I mistook Daniel's steady routines for a promise he'd never break. You'd think by now I'd have learned better. That I'd have been more careful with my heart. But I guess some lessons take longer to sink in. And sometimes, you don't realize how fragile your own story is until someone else turns the page for you. Because what came next, after 15 years of believing in our neat little life, after buying new hydrangeas each spring and leaving porch lights on for him every evening, was the kind of revelation that cracks something inside you. And once it's cracked, no amount of careful patching ever really makes it whole again. But I'll get to that. You'll see soon enough. Daniel and I got married the summer I turned 23. We had a small ceremony out on the lawn behind Jenny's Porch Cafe, the same place we first met. They strung up fairy lights between the old maple trees, and a local folk trio played gentle guitar while I clutched a bouquet of blue hydrangeas that left faint stains on my palms. Daniel wore a navy vest with tiny pinstripes and a dark bow tie that I helped straighten twice before we walked down the makeshift aisle together. His hands were warm and slightly damp, which made me oddly grateful. It meant he was nervous too. We didn't have a big honeymoon. Just 2 nights at a cozy bed and breakfast by Lake Champlain, where we drank cheap champagne out of mugs because we forgot to ask for proper flutes. I remember how Daniel laughed when I tried to feed him a strawberry dipped in chocolate, only to smear it on his chin. We spent those nights tangled up in each other under a squeaky ceiling fan, whispering promises that felt easy to make with the window cracked open to let in the cool lake breeze. When we came home, life settled around us like an old quilt. We bought a 2-bedroom bungalow a few streets off the main drag in Portland, with a bright yellow door that I picked on a whim. Daniel set up a small office at the back for his client calls. I filled the front room with bookshelves, second-hand finds I rescued from the local library sales. I liked to joke that our house smelled permanently of paper and vanilla, since I always had a candle burning somewhere. Most mornings, Daniel left for work at precisely 7:30, a travel mug of dark roast in hand. I'd stand in the doorway wearing my robe, waving to him as he backed his silver sedan out of the driveway. There was something sweet about that daily ritual, something I convinced myself was proof we had built a steady, solid life. It's strange how you can mistake habit for security. Every Sunday, without fail, he brought home a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas from the little market off 4th Street. Even in winter, when the flowers were flown in and cost more than they should, he still carried them through our front door with a smile. I'd trim the stems and arrange them in the ceramic pitcher my mom gave us as a wedding gift, then stand back and admire the way they brightened the corner table. Looking back, I wonder if that was Daniel's way of keeping me occupied, of distracting me with simple, pretty things so I wouldn't start asking harder questions. We talked about kids now and then. Usually late at night, when the TV buzzed low with reruns we weren't really watching, or after we'd come back from visiting friends whose living rooms were littered with toys. I always thought we'd get there eventually. That there was plenty of time. Daniel would squeeze my hand, give me that reassuring look of his, and say we were perfect, just the two of us. I took that as love. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was convenience. Who can say for sure? My older sister, Lisa, didn't much like Daniel at first. She said he was too polished, that there was something behind his polite nods and careful words she couldn't quite trust. Lisa's never been subtle. She worked as an insurance rep, wore pencil skirts and sharp eyeliner, laughed a little too loudly at her own jokes. We were never close in the way some sisters are. Our mother tried to keep the peace, but Lisa and I have always lived in slightly different worlds, circling each other without fully overlapping. Still, Daniel won her over eventually. He was good at that. He had this way of making people feel special in small, deliberate ways. Remembering how you took your coffee, complimenting the earrings you thought no one would notice. Even now, I catch myself recalling those tiny gestures, feeling this twist in my chest because they seemed so genuine. Because I wanted them to be. Evenings at our house were quiet. Sometimes we'd cook together, Daniel chopping onions in his careful, methodical way while I stirred sauce at the stove. Other times, I'd read on the couch while he sat at his desk, half listening to podcasts on global markets. The window above the sink faced west, so the kitchen filled with golden light just before dusk. Those were the moments that felt like real life to me, the kind you want to bottle up and save for later. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his elbow propped on the counter, that slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I thought it meant he was content, that we both were. It never occurred to me it might be something else. Do you ever wonder how many little things you misread simply because you wanted them to mean what you needed? I think about that a lot now. How many times did Daniel's faraway look have nothing to do with a tough client call, and everything to do with secrets he was keeping carefully tucked out of reach? I believed in us. I truly did. I believed in our shared grocery list stuck on the fridge with novelty magnets, in the way he texted me from business trips just to say goodnight, in the soft hush of his voice when he told me he loved me. I built my life around those small assurances. Around him. Maybe that was my first mistake. Loving him without reserve, without the slightest suspicion that our marriage might not be as airtight as it seemed. I didn't just trust Daniel. I trusted the story we'd written together. I trusted it so completely that when it finally unraveled, I was left standing there with torn pages, not even sure what part was true anymore. Because here's the thing. For 15 years, I thought I was living inside a promise. Turns out, I was just clinging to a carefully constructed performance. And the day I discovered what Daniel was really hiding, it felt like stepping off a curb you thought was solid, only to plummet into nothing. But I'll tell you about that soon. I promise. The day of Daniel's funeral felt like someone else's life. I remember standing there on the damp lawn of Riverside Chapel, clutching the strap of my black dress so hard my knuckles turned white. The service was short. A polite arrangement of scripture readings and hushed organ music that seemed to swirl around me without landing anywhere real. I couldn't keep track of the faces that drifted by. Neighbors from our street who mostly knew us as the couple with the bright yellow door, a few of Daniel's colleagues in stiff charcoal suits, their solemn nods practiced and brief. Someone from the local Rotary shook my hand twice, offering the same weary condolence each time as if he'd forgotten we'd already spoken. My mother stood off to the side with her lips pressed together so tightly the corners quivered. Lisa was there too, of course, arriving in a fitted burgundy coat that set her apart from the sea of darker tones. Her hair was pinned in loose curls around her shoulders, a little too styled for a somber morning. She dabbed beneath her eyes with a tissue that, as far as I could see, stayed dry. Daniel's casket rested on a small rise surrounded by wilting wreaths of white lilies. I remember thinking how he would have hated that, the fussiness of it, the stiff formal air. He would have preferred something simpler. A quiet afternoon by the lake, maybe. Just family and a thermos of dark roast. By the time the pastor finished speaking, my feet felt numb inside my low black heels. People began drifting over, offering embraces that lingered uncomfortably long. Their perfume and cologne mixed into a heavy cloud that made my throat tight. I found myself smiling at people I barely recognized, nodding at stories they shared of Daniel's generosity, his professionalism, how he always seemed to remember a birthday or an anniversary. It was like listening to tributes for a man I'd only partially known. Lisa slid up beside me as the crowd began to thin, slipping her arm through mine. Her perfume was something floral and sharp, maybe gardenia, and it made my eyes water. "You doing okay, Em?" she asked in that careful, almost syrupy tone she used when trying to sound tender. I wanted to say no. That I felt like I was standing on a floor made of cracked ice, terrified it might give way at any second. Instead, I just nodded. Lisa squeezed my hand a bit too hard. Daniel was good to you. Really good. Not every woman gets that lucky, you know? It struck me then how strange that sounded at a funeral. Lucky. Was that really the word for it? I let out a small, empty laugh that didn't sound like me at all. When it was finally over, when the last sympathy card had been pressed into my hands and the last gentle shoulder pat delivered, I climbed into my mother's car. We rode in silence back to the house, the kind of silence that feels thick, weighted down by all the things no one wants to say out loud. Inside our living room, sunlight filtered through the blinds in pale stripes across the coffee table. Someone had dropped off a casserole in a glass dish with a handwritten note taped to the top. Thinking of you, love the Harpers. I set it in the fridge without reading it twice. The kitchen felt foreign now, the same way your childhood bedroom does the first night you move back in after college. Familiar yet slightly off, like everything was just a hair to the left of where it should be. I found myself standing at the sink, running cool water over my hands just for something to do. My wedding ring glinted under the faucet, catching little flecks of afternoon sun. I kept twisting it around my finger, over and over, until the skin beneath felt raw. Lisa came by later that evening. She let herself in without knocking, carrying a bottle of Chardonnay and 2 mismatched glasses. Her lipstick was still flawless. I noticed she'd switched to a looser sweater and jeans that looked carefully casual. Figured you could use some company, she said, plopping down on the couch and curling her feet beneath her. Grief's weird, you know? Shows up in places you don't expect. Hits you at the grocery store or when you're folding towels. Next thing you know, you're sobbing into a bag of frozen peas. I gave her a small smile because it was easier than disagreeing. Lisa meant well, I think. Or at least she wanted to be seen meaning well. She poured us each a heavy glass, then pulled her knees up tighter. The television hummed quietly in the background, some rerun I couldn't follow. At one point, she reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her hand lingering on my shoulder a beat longer than felt comfortable. You'll be all right, Em, she said, voice dropping low. You always land on your feet. Always have. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. I couldn't have explained why. Maybe it was the too sweet curve of her mouth or the way her eyes didn't quite match her sympathetic tone. Later, after she left, I stood in the doorway watching her taillights disappear down our quiet street. I wondered if I should feel grateful for her attempts at comfort. I wondered if maybe I was just being paranoid, raw from everything. But there was something in that smile, the slight tightening around her eyes. A look I couldn't place but which sent a tiny shiver crawling up my spine. I didn't know it then, of course. Couldn't have guessed just how tangled things would become. How that simple glass of wine on my sofa, that innocent evening of sisterly solidarity, was actually the soft breath before the plunge. Because soon enough, I'd learn the truth about Daniel, about Lisa, and about the life I thought was mine. And trust me, it was nothing like the stories they told at his funeral. A few nights after the funeral, Lisa stopped by again. She brought over a tray of lemon bars from the bakery on Pine Street. She said she couldn't stand the idea of me sitting in that echoey house all alone. I wasn't really hungry, but I cut one of the bars in half just to keep my hands busy. The powdered sugar dusted my black leggings like tiny chalk prints. Lisa sank into the armchair opposite me, tucking her feet beneath her, swirling her glass of wine around as if we were 2 college roommates gossiping on a lazy weekend. She wore a loose ivory blouse and tiny gold hoops that caught the light each time she shifted. Her hair was twisted up with a tortoiseshell clip, a few strands slipping down her neck in deliberate waves. She talked about everything and nothing. Her new boss at the insurance agency, how hard it was to get decent parking downtown, the latest Netflix documentary she'd fallen asleep halfway through. Meanwhile, my mind kept drifting to the silence of the house around us. No Daniel upstairs rummaging for cufflinks. No muffled laugh from the hallway when he realized he'd misplaced his phone again. At some point, Lisa reached over and rested her palm on top of mine. Her nails were painted a glossy coral, a little chipped at the edges. Hey, I know this isn't exactly the time, but I need to clear something up. For my own peace of mind. Her voice dipped slightly, almost hesitant, though her grip tightened. Daniel loaned me some money a while back. Quite a bit, actually. And now that you're, well, settled with everything, I was hoping we could figure out how to square it. I pulled my hand back as if burned. A laugh sputtered out of me, sharp and humorless. What money, Lisa? He never mentioned that to me. Not once. Lisa blinked, her eyes flicking away for the briefest moment before she gave me a small, almost patronizing smile. Oh, he probably didn't want to worry you. You know how Daniel was, always trying to protect you from stress. Protect me. That word lodged in my throat. I nodded slowly, but inside, something cold was starting to crack open. Later that night, after Lisa left with an exaggerated hug and a promise to check in tomorrow, I found myself pacing the length of our living room. The lemon bars sat untouched on the coffee table, the powdered sugar already going stale. My heart was thudding in a way that felt out of sync with the quiet of the house. I ended up in the dining room, running my fingers over the back of each chair, over the deep scratches Daniel had once tried to sand out after dropping a heavy serving dish. Little scars of our life together. I pressed my palm flat on the table's surface, half expecting it to give me answers. Then I spotted it. Daniel's key ring, still hanging from the tiny ceramic dish by the front door. I picked it up and sifted through the familiar weight. The one to the back gate. The one to the mailbox. The old bike lock we hadn't used in years. And then, near the end, a slender brass key with a slightly different cut. I knew that key. I'd asked him about it years ago, maybe our second anniversary. We were sitting on the porch, splitting a pint of salted caramel ice cream, our knees bumping together. I'd teased him about the mystery key, asked if it was to a secret love nest. Daniel had laughed, shaking his head. It's just a storage shed by the docks, he'd told me. Nothing interesting, just dusty boxes and rusty tools. You'd hate it. Spiders galore. And that was that. I didn't push. I never did. Isn't that what trust is? Believing someone when they give you a simple explanation, not probing deeper because you've decided there's no reason to doubt them? But that night, standing there in the dim hallway with the key pressing a faint groove into my palm, I realized maybe I'd confused trust with complacency. Maybe I hadn't been so much devoted as I had been willfully blind. I barely slept. I drifted from room to room, opening drawers, touching picture frames, peeking into closets as if they might suddenly cough up the truth. The house seemed different now, even smelled different. Less like Daniel's cologne and fresh laundry, more like old wood and dust. Maybe that scent had always been there and I'd simply never noticed. At one point, I curled up on the couch with one of Daniel's old cardigans pulled around me. The TV buzzed on low, playing some late-night cooking show, the cheerful clatter of pans and clinks of silverware feeling absurdly out of place. I tried to focus on the contestants' frantic chopping, the judges' exaggerated grimaces, but my mind kept circling back to that brass key. What was he hiding in that shed? Why had he never once taken me there, not even on those lazy Saturday drives when we'd roam around Portland looking for yard sales and antique shops? You ever get that prickly feeling at the back of your neck when your instincts finally start screaming at you, even after you've spent years shushing them? That was me. Sitting there, half wrapped in Daniel's sweater, the glow of the TV painting my living room in soft yellows, suddenly realizing maybe I didn't know my husband at all. I pressed my face into the fabric, breathing in what was left of his scent. And for a split second, I almost convinced myself to drop it. To put the key back, pretend this tiny suspicion was nothing more than grief playing tricks. But I couldn't. Something inside me had shifted. Some quiet promise I'd made to myself without even realizing it, that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life wondering. And that's how it started. With one small, ordinary key and a hollow in my chest that refused to be ignored. The next morning, I decided I was going to find out exactly what Daniel had been keeping from me. I wish I could tell you I was prepared for what I found. but no one ever is. It was still early when I drove across town, the sky that washed out blue it only gets on cool Portland mornings. I barely remembered the drive. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, mind tunneling through 100 dark possibilities. Daniel had once said the old storage units near the docks were a convenient place to stash seasonal stuff, boxes of outdated tax papers, rusty patio furniture. He claimed it was dusty and smelled like motor oil, a space I wouldn't like. I never questioned it. Pulling up, I parked beside a cracked sidewalk rimmed with weeds. The storage facility was a long, low strip of corrugated metal, each bay door padlocked in a line that felt strangely accusing. I stepped out into the sharp morning air, clutching that slim brass key so hard it left a faint line across my palm. As I approached Daniel's unit, the silence pressed in. There was no humming traffic here, no cafe chatter, no clink of mugs. Just the distant screech of a gull and the gentle tap of my flats on broken asphalt. I found the lock and slid the key in. It turned with a reluctant groan, metal grinding like it hadn't moved in years. My heart thudded so loud I was sure someone would hear it. Inside was dim at first, the air thick with dust and old paint. When I found the light switch, it sparked twice before a long fluorescent bulb flickered to life overhead. I squinted against the harsh glow. And then I froze. It wasn't a cluttered mess of cardboard boxes and tangled extension cords like I'd pictured. It was organized, meticulously so. The walls were completely covered with photographs, maps, scribbled notes pinned in tidy lines. A large corkboard dominated one side, dotted with little colored flags, red strings connecting different cities and names I didn't recognize. Everywhere I looked, there were pictures of Daniel. Only not the Daniel I knew. These photos showed him relaxed, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled by salt wind, laughing in a way he hadn't in years. And always with the same woman. She had dark hair that fell in messy waves around her shoulders, a smile that seemed lit from within. They were on a beach, her arm looped casually through his. Sitting on a weathered dock somewhere, sharing what looked like a lobster roll, both grinning at something just out of frame. One photo was stamped from 2 summers ago, the same weekend Daniel had claimed he was attending a finance retreat in Boston. I felt something twist painfully in my chest, like the air had been yanked right out of my lungs. I staggered forward, hand grazing the edge of an old metal desk. Papers lay scattered across it. Bank statements, letters from foreign banks, strange company names. Underneath was a medical file stamped from a clinic in Montreal. I couldn't make sense of it all, only that it was about Daniel, some serious cardiac diagnosis. I tried to swallow, but my throat was too tight. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the folder. This was more than just an affair. This was another life. A soft noise behind me made my whole body jolt. I spun around so fast I almost lost my balance. Standing in the doorway was a young man, maybe 19 or 20, with thick dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that were startlingly familiar. He had Daniel's eyes. The same quiet, searching intensity. He took a cautious step inside, hands out slightly like he was trying to show he meant no harm. "You're Emily Foster, right?" His voice was gentle, careful. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened but nothing came out. I just stared at him, feeling my pulse thunder through every inch of me. He cleared his throat. "I'm Noah. Noah Quinn. Daniel was my father." The words landed with such a force that I actually had to grip the edge of the desk again to keep from sinking straight to the ground. For a moment we just stood there, locked in this strange, terrible understanding. He shifted his weight, shoved his hands into his pockets. "I thought you might come here eventually," Noah said. He always kept it all contained. I guess I figured once he was gone, someone would want answers. I finally found enough breath to whisper. "How long have you known about me?" "My whole life," he answered, without any hesitation or apology. He was honest about you. Said he had 2 lives, 2 families in a way. I think he hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. I pressed a hand to my forehead. The room was spinning, the bright bulb overhead buzzing like it was mocking me. Noah took a small step closer. Listen, I didn't come here to hurt you. I came because I thought you deserved the truth. And because I needed to see it for myself. The world he built here. With you. His voice cracked just slightly on that last word. And for a moment, something in me softened, just barely. Because this wasn't just my nightmare. It was his too. You know, I always thought the worst thing that could happen in a marriage was finding out your partner loved someone else. Turns out, worse is learning they didn't just love them. They built a whole hidden existence around them. Noah rubbed at his eyes, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. A folded sheet of paper. He held it out to me. It's a draft of a will. He gave it to me 2 weeks before he died. Said the real one would go to you, but he wanted me to have this. In case. I took it with numb fingers, feeling the weight of all the years I'd spent believing I was Daniel's only home. Because clearly, I wasn't. And neither was Noah. What was I supposed to do with that? With a husband who had split his heart right down the middle and left us each with a half we could never quite complete. I met Noah's eyes again. They were Daniel's eyes. Except now, I realized maybe I never truly understood the man behind them. And this was just the beginning of how far that truth would go. I don't really remember driving over to Lisa's condo. The afternoon was heavy with one of those dull gray skies that made everything feel suspended, waiting. My hands were locked around the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Lisa lived in a slick new building on the north end of Portland, all glass and steel with a concierge who gave me a polite nod as I passed. I took the elevator up, the carpet inside smelling faintly of expensive cleaning products and something like lilacs. The higher I went, the more my stomach coiled in on itself. Her door was painted a glossy teal. When she opened it, she was barefoot, wearing silky navy pajamas that made her look like she'd stepped straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Her hair was up in a messy twist, lips tinted mauve, a glass of white wine balanced casually in her hand. Emily, she drawled, her eyes skating over me. I wasn't expecting you. Come to check on your tragic big sister? I pushed past her without waiting to be invited. Inside, the place smelled like vanilla candles and citrus cleaner. A plush cream rug sprawled across the living room floor, and sleek furniture gleamed under warm pendant lights. It all looked too carefully staged, like she'd paid someone to come arrange her life into something enviable. My eyes landed on a photo frame on her console table. I stepped closer. It was Lisa and Daniel. They were laughing, glasses of champagne raised between them, confetti tangled in Daniel's dark hair. In the bottom corner was a date stamp from 5 years ago, a weekend I distinctly remembered staying home with a head cold while Daniel claimed he was attending a corporate retreat. A cold clarity spread through me. I picked up the frame, turned to face her. What is this, Lisa? She walked over slowly, sipping her wine, one eyebrow arching up. A party, obviously. You were sick that weekend, remember? Daniel didn't want to go alone. So I went. We had fun. That's all. That's all? My voice was thin, like it might snap if I tried to force it any louder. Lisa tilted her head, her mouth curving into a faint smirk. Emily, don't be dramatic. You always were a little too eager to see betrayal hiding in the shadows. This was harmless. Harmless. The word rang in my head like a cruel joke. I set the photo down so hard the frame rattled. Don't lie to me, Lisa. Not now. I know about Noah. I know about Sophia. I know about Daniel's offshore accounts and his second life. If there's more, tell me now. For a heartbeat, her confident mask slipped. Her shoulders stiffened, eyes darting to the side before snapping back. Then she exhaled a short laugh, tossing her hair like it was all mildly amusing. Fine, she said, her tone suddenly bright and brittle. You want the full truth? I'm pregnant. 10 weeks. It's Daniel's. My breath left me so quickly it almost hurt. I staggered back a step, hand gripping the edge of a nearby chair. Lisa kept talking, unfazed. We'd been seeing each other for a while. Off and on. It started as comfort, you know? You were always so busy being his perfect little wife with your neat garden and your Sunday meal plans. I was something else. A break from all that domestic monotony. She set her wine glass down with deliberate care, then rested a hand on her slight belly. He promised he'd figure it out. Said he'd take care of us. Of me. Then, well. You know how that ended. It's funny. I always thought betrayal would come with shouting. With flung vases and slammed doors. But standing there, all I felt was this eerie calm, like my mind had decided to shut off the emotional valve just to keep me standing. You slept with my husband, I said, each word measured and strangely steady. Lisa lifted one shoulder, almost coy. Oh, come on, Em. Don't act so surprised. You knew you married someone who needed more than you could give. You just didn't want to face it. Her words landed like tiny stabs. Not a single deep cut, just a series of shallow slices that together bled me out. You took everything from me, I whispered. Lisa stepped closer, her eyes glittering in the dim light. Say what you want, but this baby, it's your blood too. Whether you like it or not, we're all tied up together now. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the edges warping. I grabbed onto the back of a leather chair, steadying myself. I thought about all those years of family dinners, of Lisa leaning over my kitchen island with her bright laughter, of Daniel pressing kisses into my hair right in front of her. Had they both been laughing at me all along? You ever wonder how much of your life is real, and how much is just people letting you keep your illusions because it's easier than telling the truth? Finally, I drew in a slow, jagged breath. I'll honor whatever Daniel left in his will. For the baby. Because it's not their fault. But we're done. I want nothing more to do with you. Something flickered across Lisa's face. Maybe regret, maybe annoyance. It vanished too quickly to be sure. You'll come around, she said softly, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I pulled back before she could. No. I won't. I walked to the door, ignoring the glass shards of my life crunching underfoot. My hand was on the handle when she called after me. You're not as strong as you think, Em. You never were. I didn't turn around. Didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't strong before. But standing there, with every illusion I'd ever clung to lying in pieces, I realized I had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's exactly where real strength begins. A few days after confronting Lisa, I found myself sitting across from Noah at a diner on the edge of town. The place smelled like burnt bacon and stale coffee, the booths were torn in spots, but it was quiet. That's all I needed. Somewhere to breathe without the walls of my house pressing in. Noah stirred cream into his mug, his hands almost too big for the delicate floral cup. I noticed the way his fingers tapped a nervous rhythm against the side, a habit Daniel had when he was trying to work through a problem in his head. Seeing it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. He pushed a folded slip of paper across the table to me. It was a copy of the draft will Daniel had given him. My name was right there next to Noah's, tied together by a mess of assets and phrases like trust disbursement and corporate protections. Seeing it in writing made everything sharper, more real. I let out a long breath. So there's a safe. In Daniel's office downtown. You're sure? Noah nodded. He told me there were files there, backups in case anything went wrong. Said if either of us ever needed answers, that's where we'd find them. The idea of stepping into Daniel's private office made my stomach churn. For years, he'd called it his satellite workspace, a sterile little place he claimed was only for conference calls and tax meetings. I never once set foot inside. Isn't that strange? 15 years of marriage, and there were still rooms I wasn't invited into. You ever wonder how many things you let slide in the name of trust? How many red flags you smooth down because it's easier to believe in the person you love? Noah offered to drive. I let him. My hands weren't steady enough to grip the wheel anyway. The office building was a sleek gray tower, all reflective glass that turned the afternoon light into harsh shards. At the security desk, Noah handed over an ID card with his name and Daniel's last name listed together, co-owners under some LLC I'd never heard of. The receptionist barely glanced up. It struck me how easily all this could have stayed hidden forever. Daniel had built a world that needed no explanations. In the elevator, my heart thumped wildly. I watched our blurry reflections in the chrome doors. I looked small next to Noah. Pale. Tired. His jaw was set, eyes forward, like he was marching towards something he'd been preparing for his whole life. Maybe he had been. On the 14th floor, we stepped into a hushed corridor with thick charcoal carpet that muted our footsteps. Daniel's office was at the end. Noah slid a keycard through the reader. The lock clicked open. Inside was cool and impersonal. Gray walls. A glass desk with a laptop shut tight, no family photos, no mugs with corny slogans. Just a faint trace of Daniel's cologne clinging to the air. My throat closed up. Noah walked straight to a large abstract painting that hung behind the desk. He tugged at the side, revealing a recessed safe built into the wall. I dug into my bag and pulled out the sapphire necklace. My hands fumbled with the clasp until it finally twisted free, revealing a slim metal chip hidden in the pendant. Daniel's just because gift, it turned out, was a security key. Noah fitted it into the slot. A soft beep. The safe door eased open with a sigh. Inside were neat stacks of folders, a sleek black flash drive, and a small velvet box that made my pulse skip. I reached for the folders first. They were filled with contracts, wire transfer receipts, offshore statements linked to shell companies I'd never heard of. Orion Global Trust. Belrose Holdings. Names that sounded more like puzzles than businesses. Noah was silent beside me, flipping through pages that laid out his father's secret empire in cold, clinical typeface. I turned to the velvet box. It felt strangely heavy in my hands. When I opened it, I found a simple gold ring with a tiny diamond. My breath stuttered. Inside the band was an engraving. And always. Naughty for Emily. And for Sophia. I pressed my lips together so hard they went numb. Noah's eyes dropped to the ring. He didn't say anything, just rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was awkward, rough. But somehow more genuine than any words. Then I picked up the flash drive. I held it for a long moment, its smooth surface warming in my palm. It seemed harmless. Just another gadget. But in my gut, I knew it held the final pieces. And I hesitated. Because here's the truth. By then, I already understood my marriage was a lie. That Daniel had built walls around his heart and filled entire rooms with secrets. But part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know all of it. Was ignorance worse than knowing just how deep his betrayals ran? Noah looked at me, patient, waiting. Finally, I slipped the drive into my purse. Not here, I said. I'll look at it later. Somewhere that doesn't smell like his cologne. He nodded, almost relieved. We closed up the safe, the quiet click of the lock sounding far too final. As we left the building, the sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I realized I was gripping that necklace so tightly it left small half-moon dents in my palm. Maybe Daniel thought he was protecting me by hiding the worst parts of himself in locked boxes and coded jewelry. Or maybe he was just protecting himself. Either way, standing there with Noah by my side, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was no longer just Daniel's story. It was ours now. And whatever that flash drive revealed, it was going to change everything. I waited 2 days before finally opening the flash drive. 2 full days of letting it sit on my nightstand, its small black shape almost daring me to plug it in. Every time I walked past, I felt it like a weight in the room, humming with the promise of answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Noah stayed close. He checked in every morning, dropping by with coffee from Jenny's porch, lingering in my doorway like he wasn't sure if he should actually come inside. I appreciated it, even if neither of us really knew how to act. We were still strangers bound by someone else's deception. On the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I made myself a mug of peppermint tea, sat cross-legged on the couch with my old laptop perched on the coffee table, and slid the drive into the port. Noah sat beside me, his knee bouncing, hands clasped so tight the knuckles turned white. It took a second for the folder to pop up. Just one file inside. A video labeled simply for Emily. Seeing my name there almost made me laugh. As if putting it in neat letters could somehow soften everything that had come before. I clicked. The screen went black for a beat, then flickered to life. Daniel. Not the Daniel from my wedding photos or the man who fussed over which tie to wear on Sunday mornings. This version of him looked worn, older than the weeks that had passed since I'd last seen him alive should allow. His shirt was wrinkled, hair slightly disheveled, eyes ringed with dark hollows. He sat at his desk, that same sleek glass one we'd rifled through days before, elbows propped on the surface like he needed it to hold him up. Emily, he started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, tried again. If you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. Or I ran out of time to fix everything the way I hoped to. I felt my breath catch. The living room around me faded, replaced by just that dim recording. There's no graceful way to explain this. I was a coward. I thought I could keep the pieces of my life separate, that I could protect you by not telling you the whole truth. And I did love you. God, Emily, I loved you so much more than you'll probably ever believe after all of this. He paused, rubbed a hand over his mouth. That small gesture, so familiar it made my heart twist painfully. But I built something ugly, out of greed and fear and mistakes that kept compounding. Orion Global, the offshore accounts, the money I shuffled around, it wasn't clean. It was never clean. And when things started to close in, I thought I could tighten it all up, pay off the right people, keep you out of it. But I waited too long. My stomach turned. I glanced at Noah, who sat rigid, jaw working. Daniel leaned forward, staring straight into the camera. There's someone you need to be careful with. Lisa. She's not what she seems. I know that sounds ridiculous after all the years we've all spent together, but I mean it. After Sophia died, it was too perfect. The accident, the timing. Sophia had just told me she was leaving, taking Noah with her. Then her brakes failed on a road she drove every day. I couldn't prove anything. But Lisa knew things she shouldn't. And she was pregnant. That changed everything. I clapped a hand over my mouth. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the soft whir of the laptop fan. Daniel's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I was weak. I let Lisa pull me into something I should have walked away from. And when I tried to end it, she threatened to expose everything. The money, the fraud, the fact that I'd been lying to you for years. So I made more deals. Hid more files. I thought if I could just outrun it long enough, maybe I'd keep you safe. Maybe Noah too. I don't know anymore. He leaned back, exhaled hard. For a long moment he just stared at the desk, like he couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes even through a screen. When you decide what to do with what I've left behind, know it's yours to handle however you want. Burn it all. Send it to the authorities. Walk away. I won't blame you. I deserve whatever you choose. And if somehow you can find it in yourself to forgive me, well, I don't expect it. But I'd be grateful. Then the video ended, cutting off in a tiny stutter of pixels. I sat there unmoving, hands fisted in the hem of my sweater. The room was quiet except for the muted tick of the wall clock. It felt obscene that time kept moving forward, that the sun still slid across the floorboards while my whole life had just turned inside out again. Noah's voice broke the silence. Low. Barely there. I always wondered about that crash. My mom was careful. Paranoid about the car. She'd just had it looked over the week before. I swallowed hard. My thoughts were all jagged edges. I thought of Lisa's hand on her stomach, the smug little smile when she told me about the baby. How quickly she pivoted from grief to subtle threats. You ever notice how betrayal doesn't just come from the lies themselves, but from how easily people who claim to love you can twist the knife? I think that's what stings most. Noah reached over and covered my hand with his. It was awkward, a little too heavy, but I let it stay. Because right then, he was the only person who understood just how deep this wreckage went. I closed the laptop gently. Whatever illusion I'd been clinging to, that maybe Daniel's secrets had limits, was gone. And I knew, with a kind of bone-deep certainty, that if Lisa could orchestrate one person's end to protect her future, she wouldn't think twice about doing it again. The question was, what was I going to do about it? And that, I guess, was the beginning of choosing to stop being someone's collateral damage. The next few days blurred together in a mess of calls, hushed conversations, and papers that made my head spin. I spent hours in Simon Clark's cramped law office downtown, the one with squeaky floorboards and mismatched chairs. Simon was an old friend of my father's. A lawyer who still wore tweed jackets and used a battered leather briefcase that looked older than me. When I first showed him the folders from the safe, the flash drive, the documents linking Orion Global to all those offshore accounts, he didn't flinch. Just set his glasses higher on his nose and let out a long, slow whistle. "Emily," he said, tapping the pile with a heavy pen, "this is the sort of paper trail that starts international investigations. You could bury half the people Daniel did business with. Or burn them alive." For a second, I almost laughed. Not because any of it was funny, but because I'd never imagined my quiet life with Daniel would end up tied to words like offshore laundering or shell corporations. It felt like stepping into a movie I'd never auditioned for. Simon leaned back, steepling his fingers. "What do you want to do with all this?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Did I want justice? Revenge? A clean slate? Part of me just wanted to pack it all away, pretend none of it existed. But then I pictured Lisa's smug smile, the way she'd rested a hand over her stomach like it was some shield she could hide behind. More than anything, I didn't want to be a bystander anymore. So we crafted a plan. Simon made 3 full copies of everything. One he kept locked in his office safe. Another went to a contact he trusted in New York, someone he promised was as discreet as they come. The last stayed with me, zipped in a plain brown envelope so nondescript it could have held grocery receipts. Later that night, back at my place, I sat at the kitchen table with Noah and Jenny. The table was cluttered with mugs of chamomile tea, an open box of shortbread cookies, and printouts spread like a chaotic roadmap. Jenny twisted her dark curls around her finger, eyes darting across the numbers and signatures. "You know," she said, voice low, "most people would run. You're sitting here preparing to go toe-to-toe with criminals." I shrugged, picking at a corner of a cookie until it crumbled. "I think maybe I'm done running. I've been letting other people steer my life for years. First Daniel, then Lisa, now these faceless men who think they can threaten me into silence. I won't do it anymore." Noah didn't say anything. He just reached across and squeezed my hand. It was small, but it meant everything. The next morning, the first call came. Richard Hale. One of Daniel's old partners. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with the kind of forced patience that told me he wasn't used to waiting on anything. "Emily. I understand you've come into possession of some sensitive documents. I'd like to discuss how we might arrange for their return. Privately." I pictured him leaning back in some sleek leather office chair, adjusting his cufflinks as if my entire world unraveling was just a tedious Tuesday for him. "No," I said, my tone flat. "I'm not meeting you anywhere. In fact, this conversation is already over." There was a brief pause. Then his voice tightened. "I don't think you grasp how serious this is. You're playing with very powerful interests. The sort of people who don't extend second chances." I let the silence stretch, deliberately. Then I cleared my throat. You're right. I do understand. Which is why I've already given copies of everything to my attorney. If anything happens to me or anyone close to me, those files will hit every major news outlet by the end of the week. That's not a threat, Mr. Hale. It's just a fact. His exhale came out sharp. For a moment, I almost thought he'd laugh. You're clever, Emily, he said finally, though his voice had lost that polished edge. But clever only buys you time. That's all any of us ever has, isn't it? I said. Then I hung up. My hands were trembling when I set the phone down. Jenny appeared behind me, wrapping an arm across my shoulders, her cheek pressed to my hair. I realized I was breathing hard, like I'd just run a mile. That night, Harold Crane called. The supposed money man behind all of Daniel's darkest deals. His voice was different from Hale's. Low. Unhurried. Almost warm, which somehow made it worse. Emily. I've heard you've become quite resourceful. Daniel always said you had more grit than people gave you credit for. My skin crawled. Get to the point. I think you're underestimating what you're tangled up in. These files, they're more than just numbers on a page. They're leverage. And leverage is dangerous in untrained hands. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Try me, I said. There was a beat of silence, then he let out a small chuckle, like I was an amusing child. Very well. I hope for your sake you're smarter than your husband was. When the line went dead, I stood there in my dim kitchen, watching the clock's second hand tick past each small moment like it was mocking me. Funny, isn't it? How power shifts. 1 minute you're the woman who didn't even know where her husband's money came from. The next, you're the person holding the matches over the pile of secrets that could burn half the city down. And I wasn't entirely sure yet if that terrified me or thrilled me. Either way, I knew one thing. I wasn't backing down. Because for the first time in a long time, the fear was theirs. Not mine. And that was a feeling I wasn't ready to give up. A week after those final calls, I found myself standing in my bedroom, staring at an open suitcase on the bed. The soft lamplight spilled across piles of folded sweaters and jeans, a few paperback novels, my grandmother's gold locket tucked into a sock for safekeeping. I moved around the room slowly, touching things I'd lived alongside for years. A framed photo of Daniel and me at a street fair, our arms linked, smiles wide and easy. A tiny ceramic bowl from our first trip to Montreal, still holding stray earrings and bobby pins. You'd think by now I'd have smashed it all to pieces. But grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it just makes you gently pack your life away into neat piles, whispering promises to your old self that you'll start over somewhere else. Somewhere far. Downstairs, Jenny was in my kitchen making a pot of peppermint tea, humming under her breath. She'd insisted on being there, saying no one should close up a life alone. I could hear her moving about, opening and shutting cupboards like she was looking for something to straighten even if everything was already perfectly lined up. That was Jenny's way of coping. Find order. Find purpose. Noah sat on the porch, staring out at the small front yard that Daniel used to fuss over every spring. The hydrangeas were turning brown at the edges now, blooms curling in on themselves. I wondered if anyone would bother trimming them next season. Or if they'd just keep wilting, dropping their petals in quiet surrender. I zipped the suitcase closed, my hand lingering on the handle. This house had been so many things to me. A sanctuary. A stage. A lie I willingly performed on, day after day, because believing was easier than questioning. You ever wonder how many truths you've ignored just to keep the world you built from cracking? I do. More than I'd like to admit. I took one last walk through the rooms. Paused at the window where Daniel used to stand in the mornings, tying his bow ties with meticulous care. The bathroom mirror still held a faint ghost of his shaving cream splatters. In the living room, the couch cushions bore slight dents where we'd sat side by side, watching movies I barely remembered now. So many tiny imprints of a life that, in hindsight, was only half mine. By the front door, my coat hung on its usual hook. I slipped it on, smoothing the sleeves. Jenny handed me the tea in a travel mug, her eyes glistening just a little. "You sure you want to drive through the night?" she asked. I nodded. I need to put distance between me and this place before I lose my nerve. Noah stood, slipping his hands into his pockets. There was something both boyish and heartbreakingly adult in the way he looked at me then. "Will you call? When you're settled?" "Of course," I said, though we both knew it might be a while. Trust takes time to rebuild, even in the strangest, most unlikely alliances. Especially in them. We hugged awkwardly, his chin brushing the top of my head. For a moment, I felt how solid he was. How much like Daniel in stature, if not in soul. Then we pulled apart, and the porch felt emptier than before. Jenny squeezed my arm. "You've got copies of everything in your glove compartment, right?" I nodded again. The envelope was there, along with Simon's contact number and a spare phone Jenny had insisted I take. A small insurance policy against the unknown. Before I walked down the steps, I glanced back at the house. Its windows glowed warmly against the deepening twilight, blinds drawn just slightly uneven like always. I wondered who might live here next. Would they notice the faint scratch marks on the wood floors from when we tried to teach our neighbor's puppy to stay over? Or the tiny pencil ticks on the pantry door where I'd once measured how quickly the hydrangeas outside grew each year? Maybe it was selfish, but I hoped not. I wanted these remnants to belong to me alone. To be pieces of a story no one else could quite unravel. In the car, I adjusted the rearview mirror, catching my reflection. My hair was tied up in a loose bun, tendrils falling out around my face. I looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just more honest. Like someone who'd finally stopped pretending she didn't see the cracks. The engine rumbled to life, and with one last nod to Jenny and Noah, I pulled away. The road was slick with leftover rain, streetlights haloed in soft gold. As I drove, I kept replaying Daniel's voice from that video. The tremble in it. The regret. It didn't excuse anything, but it made him painfully human. Isn't that the worst part? Realizing the people who hurt you weren't monsters, just flawed, scared humans who made selfish choices. I don't know if that makes the betrayal easier or harder to carry. A few hours later, I crossed the state line into New Hampshire. The sign was small and battered, half hidden by overgrown bushes. I felt something loosen in my chest, like maybe I could finally exhale. By the time I pulled into a small roadside inn, a place with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed faintly, I was exhausted. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions when I paid for 3 nights up front. I carried my suitcase up the narrow stairs, the carpet worn thin underfoot, and when I finally collapsed onto the bed, I didn't cry. Not then. Because here's the thing. Starting over isn't always brave. Sometimes it's just necessary. A survival instinct that kicks in when the life you had is no longer livable. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me, listening to the faint creak of the old building settling around me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't dread the morning. Because tomorrow was unwritten. And finally, I was the only one holding the pen. I've been living in a small cottage on the outskirts of Durango, Colorado for just over 3 months now. It's one of those places where the mornings greet you with a thin mist rising off the hills and the evenings close in with a quiet so deep it feels almost holy. I found the cottage online late one night in a haze of half-sleep and peppermint tea. When I saw the photo, a squat white house with green shutters and a crooked porch swing, I booked it before I could think twice. My days are simple here. I make strong coffee in an old stovetop percolator that hisses impatiently. I take long walks along dusty trails that wind behind the property, watching the sun paint gold over fields of scrub and wildflowers. In the evenings, I read until my eyes blur. Sometimes I sit out on the porch wrapped in a chunky gray sweater, listening to coyotes call to each other across the dark. It's the first time in years that the silence doesn't feel loaded with secrets. Jenny still texts almost every morning. Usually something small. A photo of a new pie at the cafe, a blurry snap of her dog chasing its own tail, once even a quote she found on the back of a sugar packet that read, "Courage is the price life exacts for granting peace." I think she meant it as encouragement. It landed a little clunky, but I appreciated it all the same. Noah calls on Sundays. He's living back in Portland for now, finishing up college courses he'd paused during the mess. We keep things light, updates about his classes, awkward attempts at cooking. I can hear in his voice that he's trying to figure out where he fits in all this, just like I am. We never quite say Daniel's name, but sometimes it hangs between us anyway, like a ghost leaning over the phone line. I thought it would haunt me more, being away. That maybe distance would only magnify what I'd lost. But most mornings, I wake up feeling lighter. Not happy exactly. Just less tangled. There's something to be said for owning your story, even if the chapters are full of pages you'd rather tear out. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I ever truly knew Daniel at all. Or if I only loved the version of him he curated so carefully for me. His neat bow ties, the Sunday hydrangeas, the way he always insisted on doing the dishes, saying my hands deserved better than soap and scalding water. Was that real? Or was it all part of the act? I don't have the answer. Maybe it's both. Maybe people are always more complicated than the boxes we try to fit them in. I've also been thinking about Lisa. About the child she'll have soon. I still don't know what to feel about it. Some days there's a burn of betrayal that flares so hot I have to set my book down and pace the room. Other days, it's a dull ache that only makes me sigh. But there's something else too, a fragile sort of acceptance that surprises me. That baby didn't ask for any of this. Neither did Noah. Neither, really, did I. It's strange how forgiveness can look nothing like letting someone off the hook. Sometimes it's just choosing not to let anger be the only voice in the room. I'm not there yet, not fully. But I'm closer than I was. And maybe that's enough for now. I've started a small habit that feels almost like therapy. Each morning after my coffee, I sit with a cheap spiral notebook and write one page. Sometimes it's just grocery lists or half-thought-out letters I'll never send. Other days, it's messier. Bits of memory. The sound of Daniel's laugh. The way Lisa used to toss her hair back when she found herself especially clever. How Noah looked that first day in the storage unit, all raw edges and grief. Writing it down makes it sting less, somehow. Like if I give the pain a place to live on paper, it won't have to live so loudly inside me. You know, I used to believe starting over meant you had to leave every last piece behind. Burn it all, walk away clean. But I'm learning that's not really how it works. Some things come with you whether you want them to or not. The trick is figuring out how to carry them without letting them crush you. And if you're still watching this, still here with me at the end of all these tangled confessions, maybe you felt a little like that too. Like your life unraveled in a way you never planned. Like trust was a soft place you laid your head until it turned out to be a trapdoor. If it has, I hope you'll tell me. Drop a comment below. Let me know I'm not alone in this awkward, beautiful, painful business of trying to stitch yourself back together. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I'd like to keep sharing my messy rebuild with you. Who knows, maybe we'll figure it out together. Because if there's one thing this whole ordeal has taught me, it's that survival isn't about being unbreakable. It's about letting yourself crack and finding out what's still left standing when the dust clears. And for the first time in a long time, I think I'm genuinely curious to see who that person turns out to be.